Greetings. This is Doc Ock coming to you live and direct from Black Facts Headquarters Central. First minute of a new day, and we about to do it in a whole nother way. So let's get this show on the road so I can lighten my load. Proverb for today is, evil knows where evil sleeps. Evil knows where evil sleeps. And that is a proverb from Nigeria. Evil knows where evil sleeps. Now, our poem today is not a poem at all. It's actually a commentary. It's in a kind of a print that I really need these glasses on today. Let me see here. Now, all right. So this is from So Far So Good by Gil Scott-Heron. He's got some commentaries interspersed here within the poetry. And I haven't read any yet. This is the first one I'm going to read. Free will is free mind, free to evaluate the systems that control our lives from without, and free to examine the emotions that control our perspective from within. Black people everywhere are becoming aware of the gaps that exist between the American values and the values of our spirits. The nature of our spirits demand a lifestyle apart from the American life speed, a lifestyle that accents life and not death. Love and not hate. We have things to do for tomorrow. Our children will have to deal with all the mistakes we make today. To live in dignity, they will have to erase many of the personal compromises we made. We must actively search out the truth and help each other. We do not need more legislation or more liberals. What we need is self-love and self-respect by every means necessary. Unfortunately, it's not easy to love yourself after you heard hatred and self-destruction in every city. We must make the extra effort needed to identify the true enemies of our peace of mind. We can begin by realizing that though we are trapped by economic and geographical boundaries, we are still capable of spiritual freedom, supported by the truth. What we do with the truth is the key to our freedom. And that's notes from Reflection on Free Will, written on in 1972. 1972. All right. So, friend of mine again of Gil Scott-Heron once again. Now, I only have two little bitty books. I mean, these are some very small books, but you'd be surprised how much you can pack into a little tiny book of poetry, because Gil manages to pack it chock full of proverbs and parables and tropes and things. Proverbs and parables and tropes and things. Proverbs and parables and tropes. Oh, sorry. That's from something else. My bad. I slipped there. All right. So this week, our stories are going to focus on three groups of people: Black Indians, lawmen, and outlaws. Black Indians, lawmen, and outlaws. We're going to focus on all three of those this week. Now, when we first started out, I indicated that we could spend a year just dealing with the Black West, the whole idea of going Black West. We could deal with that for a whole year. So obviously, the idea of a quote unquote Black History Month, which by the way started right here at Kent State, regardless of what else you might have heard somewhere else, is it can't even be a good survey because there's not enough time in a month just to do justice really to the Black West. All we can do is just kind of give you a shotgun approach, scatter shot. So I don't know how much I'll be able to do. How far we'll be able to get on these Black Indians, lawmen, and outlaws. But we're just going to read from this one book right here. We've been using this book before, Voices of Triumph. Actually, it's African Americans, Voices of Triumph. And it has a good synopsis. So we're going to go through the synopsis here. And starting today, we're going to deal with two peoples of color, quote unquote. Now, by the way, let's see, this book was written when? Let's just check the date again. I always check the dates when I start seeing this people of color stuff. Let's see, what's the date it starts? Does it give me a date? Wants to give me everything but a date. Oh, here we go. 1993. So we're going all the way back to 1993. Two peoples of color on June 25th, 1876 in Montana Territory, warriors of the Sioux Nation and other Native American tribes decisively defeated General George A. Custer at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, killing Custer and everyone under his command. Of the more than 200 deaths, perhaps none was more ironic than that of Isaiah Dorman. As a runaway slave in the 1850s, Dorman had found refuge with the Sioux and had taken a Sioux wife. His adopted people called him Azimpi, which means teat, T-E-A-T. Yeah, I believe that has to do with an animal and a part of an animal. You have to look that one up. Azimpi, which means teat, but sounds like Isaiah in the guttural Sioux pronunciation. After the Civil War, Dorman traded on his understanding of the Sioux and their language to get work at frontier forts in the Dakotas. Dorman was 55 years old when he was appointed interpreter to General Custer, and he probably welcomed the chance to revisit Montana and palaver with the Sioux. But when Custer made his last stand, Dorman fell. Moments before he died, it is said the Sioux leader, Bull, recognized the Black man and gave him water. Afterward, when Sioux women and children mutilated the soldiers' bodies to deny them passage to the afterworld, they left Azimpi's body intact. The ironies in the life and death of Isaiah Dorman suggest the complexity of the relationships between African Americans and Native Americans. At various times, Blacks such as Dorman fought beside whites to conquer the Indians. In other situations, especially before the end of slavery, African Americans and Native Americans stood together against a common white enemy. Soon after North American colonists chose to use Black slaves instead of Indians to farm the land, Native Americans began giving sanctuary to runaway slaves and provided support for the small fugitive slave communities that sprang up near them. Although treaties between Native Americans and white colonists stipulated that the Indians had to return slaves, most tribes ignored that proviso. Now, you probably may not recall this, but I do. This is the very same proviso they put into the treaty that the British signed with the Maroons down in Jamaica. Very same proviso that they were going to let them be free. They could have all the land they wanted up there in them blue mountains up in the hills. Okay, Akampong and all those places. But if any escaped slaves came out there, they were supposed to return them. Did they or didn't they? I don't know. That's something we'll be finding out because we have more to go. But the colonists, perhaps with the divide and conquer strategy in mind, also encouraged the Indians to take black slaves of their own. The Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole tribes acquired African-American slaves by the thousands. But slavery under the Indians could be quite different. And under Southern white masters, the Cherokee, for example, were so liberal by comparison that black slaves sometimes ran away from white owners just to be an Indian slave. Okay. The Creeks intermarried with their slaves and treated the children of such unions like full-blooded Indians. Most welcoming of all were the Seminole people, who considered African Americans equals. Seminole slaves were expected only to give a small tribute in corn to their chiefs. That's it. Slaves and runaways and free blacks had much to offer their Native American allies. Unlike most Indians, black men and women understood the whites' language and were familiar with the culture. In addition, they had a rudimentary knowledge of medicine and could treat such diseases as smallpox, measles, and yellow fever, which usually devastated Native American peoples. Many Native Americans also thought blacks communed with the spirits and were capable of performing supernatural feats. It was partly because of these beliefs that Indians often spared black folks when they massacred white folks. When it came to courage, Indians were colorblind, and chiefs gladly married off their daughters to brave black men. Similarly, black men who significantly outnumbered black women in the colonies were happy to take Indian brides. The children of these marriages were considered free, and sometimes they could buy freedom for their fathers. The solidarity between blacks and Indians was often seen by whites as a threat, and with good reason. Black fugitives swelled the ranks of the Seminole and fought side by side with them against white soldiers in the bloody Seminole Wars of 1817 to 1818, and again in 1835 to 1842. When the Seminole were defeated and forced to move to Indian Territory, that's on that Trail of Tears they talk about, from Florida all the way up into Indian Territory, which is now considered to be the state of Oklahoma. Their black kinfolk became the targets of slave hunters, whereupon many Indians and blacks headed out of the country and into Mexico. For other black men and women, the American West and the contact with Indians that it brought offered some economic and social improvement. Whites, believing that blacks had a pacifying effect on the Indians, often had them handle negotiations with wary tribes. As trappers, traders, scouts, and interpreters, African Americans had many opportunities to deal with the various Indian tribes, and some continued to join Native American communities. Around 1800, Pierre Bonga, a slave who represented a Canadian fur trapping company in negotiations with the Chippewa, married a member of the tribe. His son, George, who also married into the Chippewa, was the interpreter for the United States during the 1837 treaty negotiations with the tribe. Not all Indians welcomed African Americans into their tribes, however. The Comanche and the Apache saw little difference between the whites and the blacks who invaded their lands. Sometimes they stole blacks and sold them as slaves to Cherokee or Creek owners. Other times they killed them. In 1871, for example, a Comanche band gunned down Britton Johnson, a rancher and former slave living in Texas. Comanches had earlier abducted Johnson's wife and his children. And to reclaim them, the black man pretended to join the tribe. Later, the rancher and his family escaped, only to be tracked down and murdered by Comanche raiders who disemboweled Johnson and stuffed his abdomen with the corpse of his dog. Dang. I'm going to make sure he didn't get into heaven or wherever they go, the happy hunting ground. Going to be very unhappy for him. Hey, Solomon, I see you over there, man. After the Civil War, some ex-slaves joined the U.S. Army, whose post-war priority was to sweep Native Americans off much of Western land and reservations. Black soldiers, whom the Indians dubbed Buffalo Soldiers as a mark of respect, at one time made up 10 to 20% of the Western troops. They fought the Ute in Colorado, the Cheyenne in Kansas, and the Sioux on the Great Plains. While the Buffalo Soldiers were engaged with the Plains Indians, much of the task of dealing with the Comanche went to a valiant band of Black Indians known as the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts. Never more than 50 strong, the Scouts were mostly the sons of the Black Seminoles who had fled to Mexico in the 1850s. Growing up in the borderlands, the young men had learned how to track, trap, and survive in the rugged terrain. In the 1870s, the Army recruited them as Indian fighters, promising them land as payment. The Scouts were housed in Seminole camps on military reservations in Texas. Serving under a white lieutenant named John Bullis, the Black Scouts proved to be superb trackers and cool under fire. During one engagement on April 25, 1875, at the Eagle's Nest crossing of the Pecos River, Bullis and 3 of the Scouts found themselves in a gunfight with about 30 Comanche warriors. After 45 minutes of constant attack, the 4 men attempted a retreat. The 3 Scouts escaped, but Bullis was stranded when his horse bolted. Under withering fire, Sergeant John Ward, the Black Seminole who was second in command, led his comrades back to rescue Bullis. They were successful, and for their bravery, all 3 Scouts received the Congressional Medal of Honor. What? I hadn't heard that before. The Seminole Negro Indian Scouts became one of the most decorated military units in the United States. But when the Indian threat was over in the early 1880s, the Army reneged. Yep, there's some renegers on its promise of land. And since the federal government had earlier declared 1866 the deadline to register as a member of the Seminole Nation and thus be eligible for land grants on the Indian reservation, many of the Scouts and their families were left homeless and destitute. The wars blacks fought with the Indians in the Florida swamps and against them on the Great Plains are long over, but the complex, centuries-old relationship between African Americans and Native Americans has left an enduring legacy. In 1926, Professor Melville Herskovitz, a scholar and anthropology professor at Northwestern University, questioned a sampling of 1,551 African Americans about their family histories. 1 out of every 3 reported Native American ancestors. And so my family would be one of those 1 out of 3. So that was a summary of the relationship of Black people and Native Americans out of the book here, African Americans, Voices of Triumph, vintage 1993. So tomorrow we'll continue on with Black Men of the Law. And so what I want you all to be thinking about between now and then is your own families, your own family relationships, and how many of you out there listening or friends of yours have these Native Americans in your family. I know my family does. I know other families that do as well. So this is something that's real. It's not made up. It's not fake news. It actually did happen. And much as I'm relating here in the book, that there were positives and there were negatives, pluses and minuses. There was no easy answer as to, all Native Americans were against us or all Native Americans were for us. It's a complex situation. So we have to treat it that way. This is history, not a fiction story. Okay, this is real life, and real life is messy. So all that being said, don't forget, you see I got a donation button down there. You're welcome to hit the donation button now that we got that everything straightened out with them. You can also donate at our GoFundMe page on our website, or you can look for our eBay store, Black Facts, and you can make a donation there and receive a premium gift in the mail or over the internet. Depends on how much you donate. Okay, you can start at $5, work your way up, but we do need your support. This is the only way that we can continue what we're doing. We just hit 300 live streams for the year. We plan on doing at least another 200, 150 to 200 before the end of the year. And our goal is to reach the level of 1,000 live streams, which we feel like we can do if we can keep up the pace. If we can keep up the pace, we can do this sometime late next year. And that will be an excellent body of work that anybody can use in schools, at home, cultural centers, wherever. So this is the product. This is what part of what we're creating, because we're doing it in print and we're doing it on paper. This is a multimedia project, multi-year multimedia project. So, somebody left me a message there, but I can't quite read it. But I will respond as soon as I log out. This is Doc Ock signing out. Peace out. We'll see you here tonight at 9, or you can catch us again tomorrow at noon. Don't be a loon. Make sure you're here at least by noon.